May 6, 1944. Atlantic Ocean, 350 miles west of Cape Verde Islands. Cold. Oberleutnant Zur Dietrich Vogel had never known cold like this. Oil-slicked water thick as tar, clinging to his skin, filling his mouth with the taste of diesel and salt. Around him in the darkness, 35 other men from U-66 thrashed and gasped, their iron coffin already sliding beneath the waves behind them. 3 years of war had taught Vogel the unwritten law of submarine warfare, taught every man choking in this black Atlantic water. When a U-boat dies, her crew dies with her. No rescue, no mercy. Just the cold doing its work while the enemy steams away. They'd done it to British sailors, to Americans, to anyone unlucky enough to survive a torpedo. Now it was their turn, and they'd earned it. Then, searchlights, blinding white columns sweeping across the water. USS Buckley, 500 yards and closing. Vogel's chest tightened. This was it. Some crews machine gun survivors. Others just watched. Either way, in 20 minutes hypothermia would finish what the depth charges started. But the American destroyer wasn't turning away. The engines were slowing, and through the oil and darkness, Vogel saw something impossible. Rope nets unfurling down the Buckley's hull. American sailors lining the rails, reaching down toward the water. Toward them, the 6th of May 1944, 0300 hours. The Atlantic Ocean stretches black and infinite, 350 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. A killing ground that has already swallowed 2,800 Allied ships and sent 175,000 men to graves measured in fathoms. Inside the cramped, diesel-reeking pressure hull of U-66, 48 men exist in a state of controlled terror that has become their normal. Captain Lieutenant Gerhard Seehausen stands at the periscope station, leather jacket dark with sweat despite the cold, listening to the sound that every submarine commander dreads more than death itself. The rhythmic throb of destroyer escort engines, growing louder, closing the distance with mathematical precision. The radar detector screams its electronic warning, a banshee wail that confirms what the hydrophone operator already knows: they've been found. For 6 weeks, U-66 has been the hunter, stalking convoys across the central Atlantic, a steel predator moving silent through the dark. Now, in the span of 30 seconds, they have become prey. Seehausen's voice cuts through the klaxon's wail. Alarm, dive, dive, all hands dive stations. It's automatic, drilled into muscle memory through 3 years of patrols and 100 close calls. The crew moves with practiced efficiency born of necessity. One mistake at depth means death for everyone. The diving planes angle down. The electric motors whine as U-66 tilts forward, seeking the protective darkness of the deep Atlantic. This is standard procedure, the doctrine that has kept German U-boats dominant for years. Dive deep, run silent, wait for the destroyer to give up or lose contact. The Americans will drop their depth charges, thunder and fury signifying nothing, detonating hundreds of feet away, while U-66 slips beneath the thermocline layer that bends sonar beams away into useless ocean. They've done this dozens of times. The crew believes, they have to believe, in the iron protection of their steel tube, in the superiority of German submarine engineering, in the tactical doctrine that made U-boats the Reich's most feared weapon. Surely this is just another close call. Just another American destroyer thrashing the ocean surface while the real predator waits below. But USS Buckley isn't hunting with 1,940 tactics. Commander Brent Maxwell Abel stands on his bridge, 32 years old, and commanding one of the new breed of destroyer escorts, specifically designed to kill submarines. And he's hunting with the accumulated wisdom of 4 years of brutal innovation. His sonar operator calls out precise bearings. His Hedgehog mortar crews stand ready with contact-fused projectiles that will only explode if they hit the submarine's hull. No warning, no time to evade. The Americans have evolved. They've learned. Every sunken U-boat has taught them something, and by May 1944, they've become masters of a deadly science. At 180 feet, U-66's hull begins to groan. At 220 feet, the first depth charge detonates. Not far away, close. Close enough that the concussion slams through the pressure hull like the fist of an angry god. Light bulbs shatter. Cork insulation rains down like snow. Men grab for handholds as the deck lurches beneath their feet. Then another explosion. Closer. The lights flicker and die, plunging the boat into emergency red lighting that turns every face into a death mask. Seehausen orders them deeper, but the diving planes are sluggish, the hydraulics damaged. Another explosion, and this time everyone hears it, the high-pitched screech of metal under impossible stress, the sound that separates close calls from catastrophes. A seam splits along the pressure hull's curvature. Water jets through in a high-pressure stream that could cut through flesh. In the battery compartment below, seawater touches lead-acid cells and begins producing chlorine gas, the same chemical weapon that choked men to death in the trenches of the Great War. The control room fills with frantic voices. Flooding in the forward torpedo room. Pressure hull breach. Frame 42. Chlorine gas in the battery compartment. Men are choking, gasping, fighting for breath in air that's turning poison. The dive planes won't respond. U-66 is falling through the water column, nose down, accelerating toward crush depth, where the Atlantic's pressure will collapse the hull like a tin can. Seehausen stands frozen for 3 seconds that feel like hours, facing the decision every submarine commander prays he'll never have to make. Stay down and suffocate or crush. Surface and face the destroyer's guns. There is no third option. There is no miracle escape. There is only the choice of how his crew will die. His voice, when it comes, sounds hollow even to himself. Surface, emergency blow. All hands, prepare to abandon ship. Compressed air roars into the ballast tanks. U-66 claws toward the surface, leaving a trail of oil and debris, a wounded animal seeking air one last time. At 0328 hours, the submarine breaks through into the night, hatches blowing open, men pouring out gasping and retching, lungs burning for clean air. And there, less than 500 yards away, with searchlights already swinging toward them and gun crews at battle stations, is USS Buckley bearing down at full speed. Every man stumbling onto U-66's deck knows the unwritten rule of submarine warfare, the law that governs this particular circle of hell. When a submarine sinks, you leave the enemy in the water. No mercy, no rescue. Just the cold Atlantic doing what it does best. They know this because they've done it themselves, watched merchant sailors thrash in burning oil, and steamed away because submarines can't take prisoners, can't spare the resources, can't risk the exposure. And standing there on the canting deck of their dying boat, watching the American destroyer come for them, like an avenging angel, they know they deserve exactly what's coming. USS Buckley's bow wave rises white in the searchlights. The collision is inevitable, when the destroyer's hull slams into U-66's starboard side with a shriek of tearing metal, when men start leaping into the black water to escape the sinking wreck. Oberleutnant zur See Dietrich Vogel finds himself treading water in oil-thick swells, watching his home of 3 years slide beneath the waves for the last time. He expects bullets. He expects to be left to freeze. What he doesn't expect, what none of them expect, is for the American destroyer's engines to cut to idle, for rope nets to unroll down the hull, for voices to call out in English across the water. What none of them expect is for their enemies to reach down into the darkness and offer them a chance to live. To understand the magnitude of what happens next, you have to understand the world these men inhabit in May 1944. The doctrine that governs their war, the psychology that has been beaten into their bones. D-Day is exactly 1 month away, though neither the Americans nor the Germans treading water in the Atlantic know this yet. The Battle of the Atlantic has reached its crescendo of violence. German U-boats have sent 2,800 Allied ships to the bottom since 1939, a rolling catastrophe that has killed 175,000 merchant sailors, naval personnel, and passengers. That's more than the entire population of a mid-sized American city, erased from existence in explosions of flame and drowning darkness. The numbers are so vast they become abstract, but each one represented a man who woke up that morning, ate breakfast, wrote a letter home, and then died screaming in burning oil or trapped in a sinking hull. The standing orders, from both German and Allied high commands, are brutally, explicitly clear. Submarine warfare is total war. There are no civilians in this fight. No neutrals, no mercy. Survivors are intelligence risks who might report your position, tactical patterns, or capabilities. Resources are precious: food, fuel, space aboard ship. You cannot take prisoners. You will not take prisoners. When the enemy goes into the water, you steam away and let the ocean do what it does best. The psychological conditioning runs deeper than orders. German submariners are taught from their first day of training that they are warriors in an existential struggle for Germany's survival, that the Allied blockade will starve the fatherland unless U-boats can strangle Britain's supply lines first. They are told that merchant sailors are legitimate military targets, that hospital ships are fair game if intelligence suggests they're carrying munitions, that the rules of war are luxuries a besieged nation cannot afford. Gross Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat fleet and architect of Wolfpack tactics, made it explicit in his infamous 1942 Laconia order: U-boats will not attempt rescue of enemy survivors. Period. The order came after a U-boat commander tried to rescue survivors from a torpedoed liner and was nearly killed by Allied aircraft while towing lifeboats. Donitz's conclusion was coldly logical. Sentiment equals death. Mercy is a weakness the enemy will exploit, and submarine warfare has evolved beyond the obsolete constraints of honor or humanity. Every U-boat commander, including Seehausen, carries these orders. Every crew member, including Vogel, has internalized this doctrine. They expect nothing different from their enemies. And the Americans? They've been conditioned too, taught with equal fervor that U-boats are not honorable warriors but murderers who strike from ambush, who torpedoed the passenger liner Athenia on the first day of the war, killing 117 civilians, including 28 Americans, who left hospital ships burning, who showed merchant sailors the same mercy they'd show rats. USS Buckley's crew has seen the aftermath, pulled bloated corpses from convoy wrecks, watched burning tankers light up the night sky, heard the stories from survivors about hours in the freezing water while U-boats circled and submerged. One of Buckley's machinist's mates lost his brother on a torpedoed oil tanker just 6 months ago, burned alive when the ship's cargo turned the ocean into an inferno. The rage is real. The hatred is earned. Standard operating procedure, when you sink a U-boat, is to leave the survivors and continue the hunt. There might be more submarines nearby. Your ship might be needed elsewhere. And besides, these men just tried to kill you. No one would question the decision to steam away. High Command would approve. History would record it as just another successful engagement. Lieutenant Commander Brent Maxwell Abel stands on USS Buckley's bridge in the chaos of battle, watching U-66's crew abandon ship, and faces a decision that shouldn't be difficult. His radar operator reports possible additional contacts. His sonar man warns that staying in one location makes them vulnerable. His executive officer expects the order to secure from battle stations and resume patrol. This is the moment where doctrine should take over, where training and conditioning should make the choice automatic. Leave them. They're defeated. They're done. Move on. But something nags at Abel, some instinct or calculation or moral compass that won't quite align with the accepted wisdom. These men are disarmed, helpless, drowning in the dark. And U-66 represents a potential intelligence, windfall, codebooks, tactical documents, Enigma materials, first-hand knowledge of German submarine operations and technology. The intelligence officers back at Norfolk would sell their grandmothers for access to a U-boat crew this intact, this recently operational, this full of exploitable information. Abel is a professional officer, a pragmatist, a man who understands that wars are won by exploiting every advantage. But he's also 32 years old enough to have developed principles, young enough to still believe they matter. He makes a call that sends shockwaves through his bridge crew. Prepare to recover survivors. Marines stand ready with weapons. Any hostile action, you are authorized to fire. For 3 seconds, nobody moves. Then his executive officer repeats the order, and the bridge erupts in controlled chaos. Some sailors exchange glances that speak volumes. Is the captain serious? We're rescuing Germans? After what they've done? Others grip their rifles tighter, remembering the burning tankers and the screaming men and the oil-slick corpses. The rage doesn't disappear just because the captain gave an order. It simmers beneath the surface, waiting for an excuse. USS Buckley's Marines take their positions along the rail, weapons at the ready, eyes hard. They're not rescue workers. They're guards preparing to haul aboard men who, 5 minutes ago, were trying to kill them. The tension is unbearable, a live wire sparking in salt air. On the deck below, American sailors begin unreeling rope nets, their faces blank masks that hide everything and reveal everything. And in the water, 36 German submariners tread oil-slicked swells, watching with disbelief bordering on shock as their enemies prepare to save their lives. The first rope net unfurls down Buckley's hull. An American sailor leans over the rail, reaching down toward the closest German swimmer, and both sides, American and German, rescuer and rescued, hold their breath and wonder if this moment will end in salvation or slaughter. The rescue unfolds between 0345 and 0510 hours on the 6th of May 1944, and it is brutal, painstaking work that tests every man involved in ways combat never could. The Atlantic swells run 8 feet, rolling USS Buckley in a rhythm that turns simple tasks deadly. Oil from U-66's ruptured fuel tanks has spread across the surface, thick as molasses, clinging to everything it touches. The German submariners thrash in this toxic soup, some already weakening from hypothermia, others struggling with injuries sustained during the depth charge attack or the ramming collision. American sailors line the rails with rope nets and cargo netting, reaching down into darkness, punctuated only by searchlights that turn the scene into a surreal theater of shadows and glaring white light. The first German to reach the net is a young machinist, maybe 20 years old, his face streaked with oil and vomit, hands shaking so badly he can barely grip the rope. An American seaman, his name is Patrick Doyle, from Philadelphia, 22 years old and a welder before the war, reaches down and grabs the German's wrist. For one frozen moment, their eyes meet. Doyle sees a kid, terrified and half-drowned. The German sees his enemy transformed into his salvation. Doyle hauls, the German climbs, and when the young machinist rolls over the rail onto Buckley's deck, he immediately vomits seawater and diesel oil across the spotless teak planking. Nobody helps him up. A Marine corporal with a Thompson submachine gun gestures with the barrel. Move forward, hands visible. Don't do anything stupid. The German crawls on hands and knees toward the bow, retching, shaking, alive when he should be dead. Then the next man, and the next. It becomes an assembly line of salvation and suspicion. Each German who reaches the net must find the strength to climb. The Americans will help haul, will extend hands, but they won't coddle. These are prisoners, not guests. Some Germans make it over the rail with dignity intact, standing upright despite exhaustion, meeting American eyes with defiance or resignation, or blank shock. Others collapse immediately, too weak or injured to continue. Pharmacist's mate second-class Roland Waters moves among them with his medical kit, a 30-year-old corpsman from rural Georgia who took his Hippocratic oath seriously even before the war. He encounters a German machinist with a compound leg fracture, bone visible through torn flesh, the man's face grey with shock and pain. Waters doesn't hesitate. He sets the fracture with the same careful technique he'd use on an American sailor, using morphine from his kit to dull the agony, improvising a splint from deck planking. The German screams once during the setting, then bites down on a leather strap and goes silent, tears cutting clean tracks through the oil on his face. Waters works without speaking, without judgment, his hands steady and professional. Later, he'll tell a Navy interviewer, they were patients before they were Germans, but right now, he's just doing his job, while Marines with loaded weapons watch his every move and the Germans' every response. Not every interaction is gentle. Not every American sailor has Waters' professional detachment or Doyle's instinctive compassion. When one German officer, an older man, maybe 40, with the bearing of someone who commanded men, comes over the rail, an American sailor from Buckley's engineering division steps forward and spits directly in his face. The German freezes. The Marine Guard's weapon comes up. For 3 seconds, violence hangs in the air like cordite smoke. Then the German wipes his face slowly, deliberately, and keeps moving forward without a word. The American sailor's hands are shaking, his face twisted with rage and grief. His older brother died on a torpedoed Liberty ship 8 months ago. Nobody stops him. Nobody punishes him. The line between rescue and revenge is razor thin, visible only in the restraint these men somehow manage to maintain. Another German, younger, stumbles as he crosses the deck, and an American deckhand accidentally shoves him hard enough to send him sprawling face first into the steel deck plating. Blood streams from the German's nose. The Marine Guards don't intervene. These small cruelties, these tiny acts of controlled violence, they're the pressure valve that keeps worse things from happening. And then there's Seaman First Class Joseph Mazza, 19 years old, from Brooklyn, New York, working the nets on Buckley's port side. He's hauling Germans aboard with mechanical efficiency, not thinking, just doing. When he looks down and sees a kid treading water who can't be more than 18, maybe 17, shaking so violently from hypothermia that he can barely keep his head above the surface. The kid's eyes are wide with terror and exhaustion, his lips blue, his movements increasingly uncoordinated. All the signs that hypothermia is winning, that in another 10 minutes, this boy will slip beneath the surface and drown. Mazza doesn't think, he just acts. He shrugs off his own peacoat, the heavy wool garment that's keeping him warm in the Atlantic night. And when the German kid finally makes it over the rail and collapses on the deck, Mazza throws the coat over the boy's shoulders. Their eyes meet. Neither speaks the other's language. There are no words for what passes between them, just a moment of recognition that transcends nationality and uniform and doctrine. They're both just kids, far from home, caught in a war that's so much bigger than either of them. The German clutches the coat with shaking hands. Mazza nods once and turns back to the rail to help the next man. Years later, in 1982, an interviewer will ask Mazza about this moment. His answer is simple, almost dismissive. I saw a kid freezing to death. I gave him my coat. I don't know his name. I hope he lived a good life. That's all. No grand philosophy, no political statement. Just human decency surviving in the middle of industrialized slaughter. Kapitänleutnant Gerhard Seehausen comes aboard last, as naval tradition demands. He refuses assistance, pulling himself up the rope net with movements made clumsy by exhaustion but driven by pure stubborn pride. When he rolls over the rail and stands on Buckley's deck, oil-soaked and defeated but unbowed, he meets Commander Abel's eyes across 30 feet of deck space. No surrender, no thanks. Just acknowledgement. One professional to another, one warrior to another, across the unbridgeable gulf of opposing sides. Abel nods slightly. Seehausen nods back. Then Marine Guards move in and escort the German captain forward to join his crew. As dawn begins to grey the eastern horizon, 36 German submariners sit huddled in USS Buckley's forward hold, wrapped in American blankets, eating American food, breathing American air, alive when every law of submarine warfare says they should be corpses rolling in the Atlantic swell. Above them, Buckley's crew secures from battle stations, processes what they've just done, and tries to understand what it means. Below them, the Germans sit in shocked silence, processing their own impossible survival. Neither side quite knows yet what this moment will mean, what it will teach them, what it will prove about the space between soldier and savage, between warrior and murderer, between the doctrine of death and the choice to be human first. The voyage back to Norfolk Naval Base takes 9 days, and they are 9 days where two worlds exist within the same steel hull, separated by locked bulkheads and Marine Guards, but breathing the same recycled air, feeling the same Atlantic swells, moving toward the same destination. USS Buckley's crew returns to routine as best they can, watch rotations, maintenance schedules, the 1,000 small tasks that keep a destroyer escort operational. But routine is impossible when you've got 36 enemy prisoners locked in the forward hold, men who 12 hours ago were trying to kill you, men you saved when doctrine and rage and logic all said to leave them drowning. The Germans exist in a strange liminal space between captivity and rescue, between relief at being alive and shame at being captured, between gratitude they can't express and suspicion they can't shake. They sleep on the deck using American blankets, eat American rations from American mess kits, and spend their waking hours in silence or hushed German conversations that the guards can't understand, but watch constantly for signs of conspiracy or violence. The forward hold smells like diesel oil, sweat, fear, and the antiseptic bite of the medical supplies pharmacist's mate Waters uses to treat the 8 wounded men among the prisoners. It's not comfortable, it's barely humane, but it's survival, and survival is more than any of them expected when they surfaced from their dying submarine into searchlight glare and American guns. The interrogations begin on day 2. Lieutenant James Morrison, Buckley's intelligence officer, a former high school history teacher from Massachusetts who speaks passable German, works through a rotation of prisoners in the ship's small wardroom, now converted to an interrogation space. The Geneva Convention is clear. Prisoners must give name, rank, and serial number, nothing more. And for the first 48 hours, that's exactly what Morrison gets. Seehausen sits across the table with the bearing of a man who's already won some internal victory, giving his name and rank in clipped, precise German, then sitting in stony silence no matter what questions follow. Vogel, the first watch officer, is more talkative but equally disciplined. He'll discuss the weather, the quality of American coffee, the general state of the war in abstract terms, but nothing tactical, nothing operational, nothing useful. Morrison expected this. He's patient. He knows that interrogation is a war of attrition. that information comes in fragments over days and weeks, that the real intelligence value isn't in dramatic confessions, but in tiny details accumulated across dozens of conversations. By day 5, patterns begin to emerge. A junior machinist mentions in passing that U-66's diesel engines were overdue for overhaul. Another crewman complains about the quality of German torpedoes, how many ran deep or failed to detonate. These aren't secrets, they're grievances, frustrations, the complaints of working men about their equipment. But each complaint is a data point. Each frustration reveals something about German submarine capabilities and limitations. Morrison notes everything, sends daily reports via coded radio transmission to Norfolk, and watches as the intelligence picture builds. The real breakthrough comes on day 7 when Vogel, exhausted and perhaps worn down by isolation and the psychological weight of survival, begins talking about what it was like to serve on a U-boat by 1944. He doesn't reveal tactical secrets. He doesn't betray operational details. But he confirms what Allied intelligence has suspected and what represents perhaps the most devastating blow to German submarine warfare: the casualty rate, 75%. 3 out of every 4 U-boat crewmen who shipped out never came home. 75% killed in action, lost to depth charges and aircraft attacks and mechanical failures, and the simple grinding mathematics of a war Germany was losing. Vogel says this matter-of-factly, without drama, as if he's commenting on the weather. "We knew we were dead men the moment we volunteered," he tells Morrison through the translator. "Every patrol might be the last, usually was, for someone. You made your peace with it or you went mad." This revelation stuns Morrison and, when he reports it up the chain, stuns American naval intelligence. These men weren't fanatics or fools. They were professionals who understood the odds perfectly and served anyway, out of duty or fear of desertion charges, or some combination of both. Understanding this changes how American intelligence views the U-boat threat, not as an invincible wolfpack of super warriors, but as a desperate, grinding campaign fought by men who knew they were losing but couldn't stop fighting. Meanwhile, parallel conversations happen elsewhere on the ship. In Buckley's wardroom, Abel's officers process their own moral reckoning over evening coffee and cigarettes. Lieutenant Commander Frank Harrison, the executive officer, argues the rescue was strategically brilliant. They captured invaluable intelligence assets, demonstrated American humanity to potential defectors, and followed international maritime law. Lieutenant Robert Chen, the gunnery officer whose cousin died on a torpedoed merchant ship, argues they should have left the bastards to drown, that mercy is weakness, that these men have American blood on their hands. The debate goes in circles, passionate but contained, professional men struggling with the gap between doctrine and morality. Then the youngest officer at the table, Ensign David Wright, fresh from Annapolis and 22 years old, says something that stops the argument cold. "My father told me before I shipped out that we're supposed to be better than them. That's the whole point of this war. We're supposed to be better. I think maybe we proved that today." Nobody responds. The silence stretches. Then Chen stubs out his cigarette and leaves the wardroom without a word, and the conversation moves to safer topics like mail call and weather forecasts. In the forward hold, the Germans wrestle with their own moral calculations. Seehausen remains silent, proud, unreachable, an old guard U-boat commander who will die before he thanks his captors. But the younger crewmen, the machinists and torpedo men and ordinary sailors, they talk among themselves in whispered German about the fact that they're alive, that the Americans gave them medical care, that when that kid was shaking from hypothermia, an American sailor gave him his own coat. These aren't grand philosophical debates. They're small observations, fragments of recognition that their enemies weren't the monsters German propaganda described. Vogel, lying on his borrowed American blanket and staring at the riveted steel overhead, thinks about the moment American hands pulled him from the Atlantic, about the gap between what he expected, bullets, abandonment, cold death, and what he received. He doesn't have words for it yet. The full understanding will take decades to crystallize, but somewhere in the dark hold of an American warship, carrying him toward captivity and survival, the first seeds of that understanding take root. The Americans could have been murderers that night. They chose otherwise. And that choice, that single decision by Commander Abel and executed by his crew, revealed something fundamental about the difference between soldiers and savages, between nations that fight with honor and regimes that fight with hate. The 15th of May, 1944, USS Buckley enters Norfolk Harbor with 36 prisoners who should be corpses and an intelligence hall that will help refine Allied anti-submarine tactics for the final year of the Atlantic campaign. Commander Abel receives a commendation. His ship receives credit for sinking U-66. The German survivors filter into the American prisoner of war system, some to camps in Virginia, others to facilities in Texas and Oklahoma, remote locations where German submariners will spend the remainder of the war playing cards, learning English, and waiting for news from a homeland that's collapsing under Allied bombardment. The official records note the engagement in dry, bureaucratic language. 1 enemy submarine sunk, 36 prisoners taken, valuable intelligence materials secured. But this isn't a story about official records or commendations or the tactical minutiae that fills after-action reports. This is a story about what happens in the decades after, when the urgency of war fades and men are left to process what they experienced, what they witnessed, what they learned about themselves and their enemies on one night in May, when doctrine shattered and humanity broke through. The years pass. 1945 brings Germany's surrender, the revelation of the Holocaust's full horror, the Nuremberg trials, where Großadmiral Dönitz himself stands accused of war crimes for his unrestricted submarine warfare doctrine. The U-boat prisoners return to a Germany that barely exists anymore, a shattered landscape of rubble and occupation zones where former submariners must rebuild lives in a nation learning to reckon with what it became. Some disappear into anonymity, taking factory jobs or emigrating, trying to forget the iron coffins and the Atlantic's killing ground. Others join veteran associations, seeking the only people who can understand what it meant to serve in boats with 75% casualty rates, to know you were probably dead but serve anyway, to survive when mathematics said you shouldn't. And through these networks of memory and shared trauma, stories circulate. Stories about the night U-66 died, and the Americans who pulled its crew from the water when they could have, should have, by the doctrine both sides professed, steamed away and let the Atlantic claim them. Dietrich Vogel survives the war, returns to Hamburg, becomes a maritime insurance adjuster of all things, spending his post-war decades calculating risk and probability in the same waters where he once hunted convoys. In 1978, now 60 years old, and writing to a U-Boat Veteran Association newsletter, he tries to articulate something he's been processing for 34 years. I expected to die that night. We all did. By every law of submarine warfare as we understood it, as we had practiced it, we deserved to die. That we lived, that the Americans chose to save us when doctrine and precedent, and the brutal logic of total war all said to abandon us, taught me something I couldn't admit during the war itself. It taught me the difference between armies and murderers. The Americans could have been murderers that night. They had every reason to be. We had killed their countrymen. We had shown no mercy to the merchant sailors we torpedoed. But they chose otherwise. They chose to be soldiers instead of executioners. And that choice, gentlemen, that single choice by Commander Abel and his crew, revealed something about the nation we fought and the nation we served. I am not proud of all I did in the war, but I am grateful to be alive to feel that shame and carry that knowledge. The letter circulates through veteran networks, gets quoted in maritime history journals, becomes part of the documentary record of how men process the moral complexity of serving in history's worst conflict. Joseph Mazur, the Brooklyn kid who gave his peacoat to a freezing German teenager, lives a quiet life after the war, returns to New York, works construction, raises 3 kids, attends veterans' reunions where he's more interested in the free beer than rehashing old war stories. In 1982, a naval historian tracking down Buckley veterans for an oral history project finds him in a VFW hall in Queens and asks about the rescue. Mazur's answer is characteristically blunt. I saw a kid freezing to death. I gave him my coat. I don't know his name. Don't know if he made it through the war. I hope he lived a good life. The historian presses for more. What did it mean? What was he thinking? How did it feel to save an enemy's life? Mazur shrugs. Wasn't thinking. Just doing. He needed help. I helped. That's all. But it's not all. That simple act, multiplied across 36 rescued men and dozens of American sailors who chose compassion over rage, proved something crucial. Humanity isn't a policy decision made at headquarters. It's a choice made by individuals in moments of maximum pressure, when doctrine says do one thing and conscience whispers do another. Mazur chose conscience. So did Patrick Doyle and Roland Waters, and the dozens of other Buckley crewmen who reached into the dark Atlantic and pulled out lives instead of leaving corpses. Commander Abel, in his later years, deflects every attempt to turn him into a moral hero. "We did what we could," he tells interviewers. "The intelligence value was significant. We followed maritime law. It was the tactically sound decision." But his executive officer, Frank Harrison, tells a different story in his own memoirs published in 1989. Abel saved them because it was the right thing to do. The intelligence value, the legal justifications, the tactical reasoning, those were the arguments he made to higher command to justify a decision he'd already made on moral grounds. He looked at those men in the water and decided we weren't going to be the kind of navy, the kind of nation that murders helpless enemies. Everything else was rationalization after the fact. This tension between official justification and actual motivation reveals something essential about how good men navigate bad situations. Abel couldn't stand on his bridge and announce he was rescuing Germans because it was morally right. That wasn't the language of command in 1944, wasn't how you justified decisions to superiors focused on winning a total war, so he framed it in terms of intelligence value and tactical advantage. But the choice itself, the fundamental decision to extend mercy when doctrine demanded ruthlessness, that choice came from somewhere deeper than tactical calculation. The intelligence from U-66 did prove valuable. The codebooks and charts and Enigma materials helped Allied cryptographers refine their understanding of German naval communications. The testimony from crew members about U-boat capabilities, mechanical limitations, and the devastating morale impact of 75% casualties informed American anti-submarine doctrine for the war's final year. But the real lesson, the one that echoes across 8 decades, isn't about tactical intelligence or strategic advantage. It's about the space between warrior and murderer, the line that separates soldiers from savages, the choice that defines whether we fight wars to defend civilization or destroy it. The Nazis built their war machine on the principle that total war required total dehumanization, that military effectiveness demanded the complete erasure of mercy, that modern warfare had evolved beyond obsolete concepts like honor or restraint. The 6th of May 1944 proved them wrong. American anti-submarine forces were winning the Atlantic not just through superior technology and tactics, but through a doctrine that recognized captured enemies as intelligence assets and human beings simultaneously, that understood pragmatic humanity was itself a weapon, that mercy and military effectiveness weren't opposites but complements.